So, I have to lay down some stuff before I start. Thank you so much for the positive support on the last video. It got, rather predictably, brigaded by an organized group of alt-writers, but that's a bit par for the course. Before that party started, however, the video was received overwhelmingly positively, and my sub count more than doubled. So I thank you for that. Now, raise your hands if you have heard some dumb shit about Primaris Marines. Yeah, it's a lot of you, I'm sure. When Primaris Marines were first unveiled in 2017, they were pretty thoroughly despised by a large subset of the fandom. A bunch of particular YouTube content creators even made videos about how much they hated them. But why? Well, let's look into what Primaris Marines are. That should help sort this whole mess out. Primaris Marines were announced in 2017, and they are, in essence, a last resort. Massive stores of call pattern equipment, actual Marines, gene seed, etc. were kept in stasis for when the circumstances of the galaxy seemed most dire. Why they weren't deployed when the orcs were pointing a moon-sized nuke at Terra? Yeah, we'll never know. But now, at the fall of Cadia, in the largest unified chaos assault on the galaxy since the Horus goddamn heresy, Guilliman is awoken, and the Primaris Protocol is put into action. Guilliman, acting as Lord Commander of the Imperium, took Primaris Marines of hundreds of different chapters and handed them all out as reinforcements. This allowed understrength chapters like the Salamanders, who had since been dwindling in number to the point of near extinction, to start forming successor chapters entirely of Primaris Marines. This led to the Indomitus Crusade, a massive Imperium-wide crusade the likes of which have not been seen since the Great Crusade to push the forces of chaos back into the Eye of Terror, and to reclaim lost land for the Imperium and the glory of the Emperor. So what exactly are Primaris Marines? Well, basically they're an improvement upon Space Marine genetic engineering. They have 3 extra genetic implants. The sinew coils, which are metallic coils in the sinew of the Space Marine to increase the strength of the Marine and give an extra layer of internal defense. The Magnificat, which is a device placed in the brain to manipulate the hormone creation within the body to make them grow taller and stronger. Then there's the Belisarian Furnace, which is a device connected to the heart that pumps out combat stims to keep a Marine going when he's about to die. All this really means is that Primaris Marines are a bit stronger and a bit harder to put down than their firstborn counterparts, but with a nearly negligent difference. Of course, the difference between firstborns and Primaris can vary wildly between authors and absolute sheer plot convenience, but genetically speaking, there's not a huge amount of difference between them. What definitely sets Primaris apart from firstborns is their equipment. Call pattern is a generic term I use to describe any technology made specifically for use by Primaris Marines, and the tech used by the Primaris Marines are all insane. Their tech generally has the consistent theme of being incredibly modular. For instance, the Tacticus Power Armor's Gravis, Phobos, and Omnis patterns are all actually just sets of Tacticus armor instead of completely different armor marks. This is used to make each Primaris Marine serve a highly specific and niche purpose. There is almost no strategic flexibility in their training. If you are a Reaver, then that is what you do, and only what you do. This exists in stark contrast to Firstborns, who, before joining a tactical squad, spent their first few centuries of service bouncing between Assault and Devastator squads. Because each Firstborn was expected to be a master of every weapon available in the chapter's armory, this gave them an untold level of versatility and flexibility, where Primaris Marines can only do one thing at the cost of everything else. That's more or less what Primaris Marines are. They're better designed and better outfitted, but heavily specialized Space Marines who exist to serve one specific purpose, both tactically and on a grander scale. So now that you know what Primaris Marines are, we can begin to discuss the hatred and controversy surrounding them. Generally speaking, arguments against Primaris Marines fall into 2 camps. They're too powerful, or they break the lore. I'd say a good 90% of arguments in favor of Primaris Marines being bad fall into those two categories, though there are some particularly wacky and surprisingly common arguments that I want to get out of the way first, since I know I'm going to hear them in the comments.
Primaris Marines are basically Ultramarines because they have no gene seed flaws.
This one is a bit understandable because Call did say he cured the Black Rage and the Canis Helix and all that, but I wonder if that information was ever contradicted. I wonder if Call, as a character, has been set up to be very distrustful and deceitful. I wonder if there's any indication at all that he might have been fucking lying about that!
Serious crap!
But Salamander, the Death Company Primaris, was only introduced with the Blood of Baal.
Yes, I know that. But even before Blood of Baal, we still had stuff like, I don't know, Coal Black and Red-Eyed Salamanders. If Call had seriously cured all the gene seed flaws, why do salamanders still look like Dark Iron Dwarves? Ignoring that, just pushing that aside for a moment, chapter cultures were not entirely defined by their genetic deviations. There were fringe exceptions, like the Blood Angels, whose genetic deviations are so thorough and impactful that their culture was naturally going to form around it. But the White Scars' obsession with speed and mobility isn't because of a genetic defect, it's because Jakadai Khan was raised by space Mongols. Not every value a chapter holds is comorbid with a flaw in their gene seed. If this were true, I would maybe agree with you that Primaris Marines are a bit too bland, but it's just not the case. A Primaris Salamander doesn't just act like an Ultramarine. They act like a salamander who happens to be even larger than most salamanders.
But what about their enhanced psycho-indoctrination? Would that not render them into personalityless automatons?
No. Yeah, they have stronger psycho-indoctrination to make sure they don't fall to chaos, but so do Deathwatch Marines. Nobody says that Deathwatch Marines are personalityless automatons. Why I hear this so often, it's honestly kind of lost on me. But now that we have all that cleared up, just kind of got all the low-hanging fruit out of the way, let's talk about some arguments I take more seriously. They're too powerful is something I hear a lot about Primaris Marines. It's high-key the most common thing I hear about them when people make complaints about them. And it's a complicated issue. I think something one of my fans on Twitter told me is really applicable here. When it comes to our own minis, the lore is what we make it. Like, Warhammer 40k's lore is intentionally obtuse and obfuscated. It has a lot of purposeful vagueness that is meant to allow for people to customize their minis however they want. And the result of this is that authors, when writing their own books, tend to have a lot more leeway than some might think they should have. Sometimes lore can be stretched or bended to great effect, and other times not so much. So really, exactly how powerful Primaris Marines are is a little bit up to you. All that to say, it's not actually the fault of Primaris Marines that you decided to take the most unfavorable interpretation of them possible and made some wild claim about how they're as powerful as a Primarch each. The second argument I hear a lot goes, they make no sense within the lore, and this is a much wider claim that I will need to more thoroughly specify. The "they make no sense within the lore" argument is usually an offshoot of several different arguments. For instance, nobody except the Emperor has been able to improve upon the Space Marine model, so clearly it makes no sense that Primaris Marines could even exist. And sure, maybe. Except, Bile exists? Fabius Bile, that named Emperor's Children apothecary. He's one of the most prolific biological scientists in the 40k universe. He was able to fucking clone Fulgrim, a literal Primarch. He, during the Horus Heresy, created gene seed organs by himself, based on an organ from the Lair Xenos race, which enhanced their nervous system and rewired their brain to process pain as joy. The idea that nobody but the Emperor can make better Astartes is absolute hogwash that has no basis in actual lore. The other offshoot of this argument I hear a lot is inventing new technology is considered tech heresy within the Adeptus Mechanicus. Call wouldn't have been able to get away with rolling out new lines of technology because it would be considered a great sin. Which, in any other circumstance, you might have a point, but this had the backing of Guilliman, who is basically the closest thing to the Emperor walking around without the Emperor physically getting up out of his throne, and was only rolled out when the entirety of the Imperium looked to be doomed. The alternative to committing all this tech heresy was the Imperium falling. And so just like what happens in, several other lore instances, such as the Eisenhorn saga, when situations seemed most dire and the alternative was death, heresy was allowed to be committed, and with virtually zero consequence. I mean, come the fuck on, there's an entire subset of Inquisitors who are known for regularly breaking the rules and committing heresy to get the job done, but they're allowed to exist. All these examples are meant to illustrate that, almost every complaint levied against them in regards to their existence being impossible within the pre-established lore has some kind of in-universe precedent or previous example of it happening, sometimes from decades ago. With all that said, what are some things I like about Primaris Marines? And well, I don't think they're perfect, so what are some things I personally have issues with? Well, to start this section of the video off on a positive note, I'll just say I love their aesthetic and what they represent. In terms of their aesthetic, I love that they visually harken back to the days of the Horus Heresy and Great Crusade, what with their armor that was clearly based on Maximus armor. It visually portrays, in a rather elegant way, that Guilliman is trying to bring the Imperium back to its golden age of advancement and expansion. I love that they represent the series finally advancing. We've been stuck in this stagnant era of some time in the late 41st millennium, and now, after what feels like decades, we're finally advancing the timeline forward in a substantial way. Things are changing, and faster than they've ever changed in 40k before. In general, post-Cadia 40k has felt like GW is really cognizant of the fact that 40k, as a setting, hasn't really gone anywhere in the over 30 years of its existence. Like, sure, stories were told and some grand shit happened, like the Wars for Armageddon or the Damocles Gulf Crusades, but they all ended with the status quo being maintained, like it's a sitcom. Nothing ever changed. No event had any long-term consequence. The overarching narrative of the setting was indefinitely put on pause until Primaris Marines showed up. For better or for worse, I think the galaxy was due for some change, and that's what the Primaris Marines represent to me. Also, they just look rad as hell. Have you seen the Primaris Chaplain model? Oh god, it's so beautiful. But there are a few things about Primaris I absolutely despise. So for the sake of fairness, I now get to complain, and nobody can stop me! So, to really explain my issue, let's use the humble Tactical Marine as a point of comparison. Tactical Marine squads can come in units of 10, with one guy being able to take a special weapon and one guy being able to take a heavy weapon, with the sergeant having access to some cool war gear options like power swords and combi bolters. This allows you to spec your squads into killing specific types of units. Want to have your tactical squad be better at dealing with infantry? Then have a heavy flamer as your heavy selection and a flamer as your special selection. Want to really stick it to tanks and vehicles? Have one guy take a las cannon and one guy take a melta. And that's not even mentioning the things the sergeant can take. This leads to ultimate customizability. I mean, it wasn't good, at least not in 8th edition, but it was nonetheless incredibly fun to customize and tailor your army as much as Firstborn units allowed you to do. So what do Intercessors, the Tactical Marine Primaris equivalent, get? 3 slightly different versions of the same gun. There's the Call Pattern Bolt Rifle, the Auto Bolt Rifle, and the Stalker Bolt Rifle. Thanks to the bolter drill special rules that came out midway through 8th edition, bolt rifles are just sort of the best weapon to take in the most amount of scenarios, especially if you're building your list around shooting. Okay, so what do Reavers get? A bolter carbine, or a bolt pistol and a combat knife? You starting to see my problem? If you remember from before, I said there is almost no strategic flexibility in their training. And this translates within the tabletop to Primaris units having next to no war gear options. They're rolling out an entire new unit, the Eradicators, just to effectively do the job of giving the Intercessor a fucking melt-a-gun. Like, seriously, this is ridiculous. Space Marines are and always have been about tactical flexibility. They are, throughout their history, whatever the Imperium needed them to be. This so incredibly spits in the face of that I can genuinely understand why this could turn people off of Primaris Marines completely. Their solution to this has been to make more units that all serve very niche and tactical roles and have non-standard war gear, when all that does is bloat their codex further when they could just consolidate a lot of that into a few units with lots of war gear options like before. It's just a bit shit when I have to take up an elite slot just to use what are effectively Reavers, but with a different gun. And actually, that brings up a good point. Model bloat is a big problem within the Primaris Marine lines in general. There's no less than 6 generic Primaris Lieutenant models, with 3 chapter-specific models, including Blood Angels, Dark Angels, and Space Wolves Lieutenants. This is not necessary. In fact, I dare say this is crazy, because each of the 6 generic models just have different loadouts of war gear options that you can take. So instead of having one $40 box with all the bits you would ever need, you need to buy one of several $35 boxes to get the loadout you want. Okay, but in all seriousness, I love Primaris Marines. I think they look rad, and I think their fluff is pretty cool, and I love having true-scale Marine miniatures. I also adore they opened the floodgates for successor chapters of my 2 favorite legions, the Space Wolves and Salamanders, who canonically don't get them that often, if at all. Space Wolves, because the Inquisition ends up just purging them for genetic deviance, and the Salamanders, because there's only ever like 5 Salamanders alive at any given moment. But both of those problems have been fixed, and I've been permitted to just spam out as many Primaris successor chapters as I so desire. And I very much do desire. However, they get a lot of flack, some of it deserved, a lot of it not. But in the end, when all is said and done, Primaris Marines are cool, y'all are just mean. A very special thanks to Serena J. Fleming, my first $1 patron. If you want to join Serena J. Fleming, go ahead and stroll on over to the Patreon. For just $1 a month, you can have your name read out loud at the end of every video. There's a ton of other special perks to get when signing up for my Patreon. And if you liked the video, go ahead and drop a like, spread it around. Subscribing and ringing the bell is one of the best ways to know when I'm uploading a video. But an even better way to figure out when I upload than that is to follow me on Twitter, @Samantha18th. Thank you for watching and have a fantastic day.